The cowboy who never spoke first said everything with one look. You warm the bit in your hands before you put it in a horse's mouth. A cold morning like that first one, the steel will burn an animal the same as a hot iron will, and a horse don't forget that, not ever. So I had it tucked under my coat against my belly while I checked the cinch, breathing on it, and the colt stood there blowing steam down my collar, watching me the way they do. That's the first thing I want you to know about me, because it's about the only thing I ever did right without somebody having to teach me twice. I knew how to be quiet around a thing that was scared. People took that for slow. Most of my life they did. I'd come into a bunkhouse and a man would talk over me, around me, like I was a stove that happened to be warm. I let them. I figured if a fellow had something worth hearing, he'd find a way to make me hear it, and the rest was just noise to keep the cold off. I was wrong about a few things in my life. I don't think I was wrong about that. This was up on the Rule Place, north of the Muscle Shell, a long way from anything that had a church bell. Old Man Rule ran maybe 900 head and a string of horses meaner than they had any cause to be, and I'd been with him going on 11 years by the time the woman came. 11 years, and I'd never once been made foreman, never once been asked. The man who had the job was named Prout, and Prout could talk. Lord, that man could talk. He could stand in the middle of a wreck, a herd turning on itself, a wagon down in a creek, and narrate the whole thing in a voice you could hear over the water, and the green hands loved him for it because he made a disaster sound like a thing a man had a handle on. I'll give him that. He had a handle on the words. I want to tell this the way it sat in me, not the way you'd lay it out on paper, so if I double back, bear with an old man. I'm going to start with her hands, because that's where I started, though I didn't know it then. She came in October, on the freight wagon with the winter flour, and the first I saw of her was her standing in the cookhouse doorway with her sleeves already pushed up like she'd been there a year, and somebody had just stepped out. The old cook before her had been a one-legged Welshman who burned everything and dared you to say so, and he'd finally drifted off south, and Rule had sent to Miles City for somebody. Nobody expected a woman. A woman on a winter outfit, 40 miles from the next, was a thing men had opinions about, and they had them loud at supper the first night, while she stood at the stove with her back to all of it. Her name was Cora Hale. I learned that from the way Rule said it to her, not from anybody introducing me, because nobody introduced me. I sat at the end of the bench where I always sat, and I ate, and I watched her hands. She had a burn scar on the back of the left one, old and shiny, the kind you get reaching past a flame for something you needed more than you minded the pain, and she worked that hand the same as the other, didn't favor it. She set a plate down in front of a man without looking at his face, and she had the plates stacked in a way that told you she'd done this for a long time and not in a place this rough. There was economy to her, no motion wasted. I have spent my life around animals that waste no motion, and I trusted in a creature, that kind of stillness inside the moving. That first night Prout got to talking the way he did, telling her how it was going to be, what the men liked, what they didn't, how she'd want to do the biscuits, and she let him run on while she scraped the griddle, and then she said one thing. She said, "I cook, you eat, we'll get along." And she didn't say it sharp. She said it the way you'd state the weather. And Prout laughed like she'd made a joke for his benefit, and the men laughed because he did, and I sat at the end of the bench, and I didn't laugh, because she hadn't made a joke. She'd drawn a line in the dirt with her boot toe and stepped behind it, and only one person in that room had seen her do it. She caught me not laughing, just a flick of the eyes down the length of the table and gone. I went back to my plate. But that was the first of it. That was the first time we looked at each other, and a thing got said that nobody heard. I have to tell you about the horse now, because the horse is in this whether I want him to be or not. There was a black gelding on the place that Rule had took in trade for a debt, a big-boned, ugly thing with a wall eye and a temper, and the man who'd had him before had ruined him the way men ruin horses, with a quirt and a short rope and his own bad temper, until the horse had decided that the whole human race was a thing that came at you, and you'd best get your licks in first. He'd put 2 men on the ground that I knew of. Prout wanted him shot. Said it loud, said it more than once, said a horse like that was a dead man waiting to happen and no use to anybody. And he was half right, the way a man's half right when he's looking at the easy part of a thing. I asked Rule could I have the use of him. That was a long speech for me. Rule looked at me a while, he'd known me 11 years, and he knew that when I asked for a thing it was a thing I meant, and he said, "He'll break your fool neck." And I said nothing, which Rule understood to mean I'd thought about my neck and decided it was my business, and he waved his hand and went in to his supper. So I had the black, I didn't ride him, I didn't rope him. For the better part of 2 weeks I did nothing with that horse but be in the same country as him. I'd take my coffee out to the corral in the cold dark and stand at the rail with my back half to him and drink it slow and not look at him. And he'd stand off in the far corner with his bad eye toward me and his good eye toward me, both of them swinging his head to keep me in sight, blowing, stamping, waiting for the thing that men did. And I just didn't do it. Day after day. I'd come, I'd stand, I'd leave. I never crowded him to the rails. I never let him think I wanted anything off him at all. That's a thing I knew how to do that I couldn't have told you how I knew. You make yourself into a thing that doesn't want. A scared creature can't read a man who doesn't want anything off him. It's the wanting that frightens them, the lean toward the reach. So I unlearned the reach, out there in the dark with my coffee going cold, and somewhere in the second week the black quit pinning his ears when I came. And along about the third week I came out and he was standing at the near rail, waiting, and when I leaned on the wood, he put his big ugly head down over it next to my shoulder and breathed, and I breathed back. And we stood there, the two of us, not wanting anything in the steam of our own breath, and the morning star going pale. I didn't know she was watching. The cookhouse window looked out on that corral, and I'd never once thought about it. But she'd been up before the dark same as me, all those mornings, getting the stove going, and she'd been watching a man stand in the cold and do nothing to a killer horse until the killer horse came to him. I found that out later. At the time, I just had my forehead against a black horse's jaw and the whole sky to myself, and it was enough. It was more than I'd had in a long while. Now I'll go on to the bad part, but I want to lay one more thing down first so you understand the shape of the man I was. I had loved a woman once when I was young, down in the nations, and I had not been able to say it. Not could, not as in I tried and the words came out wrong. Could, not as in the words never came at all, they backed up in me like cattle in a chute, and she waited. And she was a good girl and she waited longer than she ought, and in the end she married a man who told her every day what he thought he felt, which was less than I felt and said worse, but said. I have thought about that a great deal in my life. I had decided by the time I was the age I was on the rural place that some men are made to say things and some are made to do them, and I was the doing kind, and that the doing kind die alone, mostly, and that was just the bill for being what you were, and I'd quit being bitter about it the way you quit being bitter about the winters. You don't argue with a winter. You bank the fire and you get through. So I wasn't a man looking for anything. I want that clear, when she started leaving me the heel of the bread. That's how it began, the part with her. Not with a word. She started saving back the heel of the loaf, the crusty end that the soft-handed young hands didn't want, and setting it by my plate without a word because she'd noticed, God knows how, I never said that it was the part I liked, the part with some chew to it, the part a man can taste. The first time I thought it was an accident. The second time I knew it wasn't, and I looked up the table at her, and she was already turned away to the stove, but the back of her neck was red, and a woman's neck doesn't go red over a piece of bread, unless the bread is carrying something the bread can't say either. We were two of a kind, is what I'm telling you, though it took me a long while to let myself believe it. She had words, and she'd quit spending them on people who didn't earn them, the same as I'd never had them to spend. She'd learned to say things with a heel of bread and the angle of a plate. I'd learned to say them with the warmth I put into a bit before I bridled a horse. We were both of us fluent in a language with no words in it, and the rest of that outfit was deaf to it and didn't even know they were deaf. The winter came on the way it does up there, all at once and for keeps. We'd had a soft fall, and then in the second week of November the sky went the color of a dirty fleece and stayed that way for 3 days, and then it opened. I have seen storms. That one I'll carry to my grave. The wind came out of the north so hard it laid the smoke flat off the chimney, and the snow didn't fall so much as fly, sideways, fine and hard as sand, so that a man couldn't see the barn from the bunkhouse, couldn't see his own horse's ears, and the cold behind it was a killing cold. The kind that's quiet, that doesn't even hurt after the first of it, just makes you want to sit down. And we had a kid out in it. Hewitt's boy, Tobe, 17 and green as grass, who'd ridden out before the worst of it to push some strays down off the north bench, the way you do, and who hadn't come back. You should have heard the cookhouse when they figured it. Prout was in the thick of it, of course, loud, and I'll say this for him, he wasn't a coward. He wasn't standing there saying, don't go to save his own hide. He was saying it because he believed it. He stood with his back to the door and his arms out like a man holding a gate, and he said no man rides out in this, that you couldn't see a hand in front of your face, that you'd lose yourself in the first 100 yards, and they'd be hunting 2 corpses come spring instead of 1, and that the only thing to do was wait for it to break and pray the kid had the sense to get down in a coulee and let his horse keep him warm. And the worst of it was he was right. He was right the way the book is right. In any ordinary storm, that was the wise thing, and the men knew it, and they hated it, and they stood there hating it with no place to put their hands. I was already getting my coat. I didn't say a word. I want you to understand it wasn't bravery, or if it was, I never felt it as bravery. It was that I knew that country. 11 years I'd ridden the North Bench in every weather God made, and I knew the lay of every coulee and the way the wind funneled through the gap above the dry fork. And I knew that a green kid running from that wind would run with it downhill, and that downhill from where he'd have been was a box draw with a cut bank, and that if he'd gone in there the way I figured he had, I could find the mouth of it blind by counting the rises with my horse's feet. Prout couldn't have. Prout was a Texas man, and he'd been on the Muscle Shell 4 years, and he knew the brands and the markets and the men, and he did not know that country in the dark with his eyes shut, and I did, and the difference between those two kinds of knowing was a boy's life, and there wasn't time to explain it. There's never time to explain it. By the time you've explained a thing, the moment for it has passed, so I didn't explain it. I got my coat. Prout grabbed my arm. He wasn't being a fool, he thought he was saving me. He said, "You hear me? You go out that door, you're dead, you understand me, you slow son of a—" and he stopped because of how I looked at him. I have been told by the one person who ever bothered to learn to read me that I have a way of looking at a man that ends a conversation. I never knew it. I never practiced it in a glass. But I looked at Prout with his hand on my arm, and I held his eye, and I didn't say one word, and his hand came off my arm, and he stepped back, and he let me by. And I have wondered since what was in that look, that it could do what all his words couldn't do for him. I think it was just the truth. I think he saw that I knew a thing he didn't, and that I was going whether he liked it or not, and that the only question left was whether he was going to be the kind of man who helped or the kind who hung on a sleeve. And he chose, in the end, to be the kind who helped. He turned and started barking orders: get a fire built up, get the lantern in the window, get water hot, get blankets off every bunk, and he was good at that. That was his gift, and I let him have it. We each of us did the thing we were made to do, and between the two of us that night, we did the whole job. I've made my peace with Prout. He was a louder man than me and a lesser horseman and a better talker, and there's a place in the world for all three of those things. She was at the door when I went out, Cora. She'd put a hot stone in a sack, and she pressed it into my coat against my chest without a word, and she pushed a wad of something into my coat pocket, biscuits. I found out later, hard biscuits, for the boy when I found him, because she figured I'd find him. She never doubted it for a second, and she looked up at me in the lantern light with the snow already in her hair, and she didn't say be careful, and she didn't say come back. She put her 2 hands flat on my chest, over the stone, just for a breath, the burned hand and the whole one, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and that was the whole of it. That was everything either of us had to say. I have had men talk at me for an hour and tell me less than that woman told me with her 2 hands and 1 look in a doorway in a blizzard. She told me she knew what I was. She told me she'd be standing right there when I got back. She told me to bring the boy. She told me a thing I'm not going to put a name to because it wasn't named yet, not out loud, not for a long while after. And then she stepped back and let me go, the same way the black horse had let me come, neither one of us reaching, both of us sure. I'm not going to dress up the ride. There's nothing to dress. It was 4 hours of the worst country and the worst weather a man can be in, and most of it I rode with my eyes shut because open or shut made no difference and shut hurt less, counting the rises, trusting the black, for it was the black I rode, the killer, the one Prout wanted shot, the only horse on the place with bottom enough and sense enough, and I'll say it, heart enough to do what I asked. He didn't fight me once. He'd come over to me in the cold those mornings on his own, and now I'd come for him in the cold, and he knew it. And there is a thing that passes between a man and a horse that has decided to trust him that I would put up against any loyalty you can name. He put his head into that wind because I asked him to. He found footing where there wasn't any. When I lost the count once and sat there froze and beat, not knowing, he took a step on his own downhill, sure. And I let him have his head, and he walked us straight to the mouth of that box draw like he'd been there 1,000 times, and maybe in some horse way he had. The boy was alive. Down in the cut bank, just like I'd figured, jammed up under the overhang out of the worst of the wind, half out of his head with the cold, his horse dead beside him. The horse had foundered and gone down, and the boy'd had the sense, the one piece of sense that saved him, to crawl in against the warm carcass and stay put. He was crying when I got to him. Crying and laughing both, the way the cold makes you, and saying my name over and over, the name the outfit called me, which I won't even tell you because it was a name they hung on me for not talking, and it doesn't deserve to be in this story. I got the hot stone out of my coat and put it against him. I got the biscuits in him, what he could chew. I got him up across the black's withers, and I got up behind, and I turned us into that wind to go home. And that's the part I don't remember good, the going home, except that the black did it. The black brought us both. And somewhere in the last of it I saw a light, low and yellow and swimming, and it was the lantern she'd had Prout set in the cookhouse window, the one window that faced the north bench, burning all those hours so a froze man would have something to ride toward, and I rode toward it. They came out and took the boy off me. Hands everywhere in the light and the blowing snow, and somebody had to pry my hands loose from the reins because they'd locked there, and I stood in the trampled snow in the lantern glow, and I couldn't feel my feet, and I was the most alive I had been in 20 years. She tended the boy. That was right. That was the job that mattered, getting the warm back into a half-froze child slow enough not to kill him, and she knew how. She'd done it before in some other life back east, and she did it with her sleeves shoved up and that economy of motion I'd seen the first night. And I stood in the corner of the cookhouse where I'd always stood, dripping, shaking, and watched her hands save a boy's life. And when she had him wrapped and warm and dropping off to sleep with the men crowded round, she came across the room to me. The whole outfit was in there. Prout was in there. Old Man Rule had come down from the house in his nightshirt and his big coat, and he was in there. And she came across that room to me in front of every one of them, and she took my face in her two hands, the burned hand and the whole one, cold against my cold cheeks and then warm, and she turned my face down to her and she looked at me. She looked at me the way I had taught a killer horse to let himself be looked at. And the whole room got quiet, even Prout, because there are some things even a room full of rough men knows to be quiet for, and she said in front of all of them, "There you are, Eli." Eli, my given name. She'd got it from old Rule weeks before and saved it, the way she saved the heel of the bread for when it would mean the most. Not the name they called me for being silent. My own name, the one my mother gave me that I hadn't heard out of a kind mouth in more years than I'll admit to. There you are, Eli. Like I'd been lost a long time and not just the 4 hours of that night. Like she'd been looking a good while and had finally found the man under the quiet and was glad of him and didn't care who watched her be glad. I didn't say anything. Of course I didn't, you know me by now. But I put my hand up over her burned hand where it lay against my face, and I held it there, and I looked back at her and let her see the whole of it, everything, all of it that I'd never said to that girl down in the nations 40 years gone, all of it that had backed up in me like cattle in a chute my whole life. I let it all come up into my eyes, and I held them on her, and I let her have it. And she nodded slow like a thing being settled, and her own eyes filled, and she said, soft, just for me though the room could hear it, "I know. I've known a good while." And that was the asking and the answering, both, done without a single word from me, in front of the whole outfit, and there wasn't a man in that room who didn't understand exactly what had just happened between us, even the ones who'd thought me slow their whole acquaintance. Maybe especially them. Prout courted her, I should tell you, before that night. I never told you that because I didn't want you thinking it weighed on me, and it didn't, but it's true, and it makes the rest mean more, so I'll say it. Prout had been after her since she came. He had a half-section of his own up the creek he was always talking about, and good prospects, and he was foreman and might be a partner someday the way Rule had no sons. And he was a fine-looking man with a fine head of words on him, and any sensible woman doing the arithmetic on her future on the high plains would have done a long sum on Prout and come out ahead. Everybody figured she would. The men joked about it, when the wedding be, and she'd never let it go anywhere. She'd hand Prout his plate the same as anybody's and turn back to her stove. But they figured it was just a matter of him wearing her down, because what else would a widow woman do, alone, out there, with a good man offering? She chose the quiet one. She chose the hand who'd never make foreman, who couldn't tell her she was pretty, who'd never once in his life stood in the middle of a room and made a hard thing sound easy. She chose the one who warmed the bit before he bridled the horse. And she did it in front of all of them on purpose, I think, so there'd be no doubt and no taking it back and no man left wondering. She had her own kind of courage, that woman, the loud kind when it counted, where mine was all the quiet kind. We made a hole between us. We each had what the other didn't. We were married in the spring, when the preacher made his circuit, under the cottonwoods down by the dry fork where the green comes first. Rule gave us the use of a line cabin up on the north bench and the running of the horse string, and I broke colts for the outfit and a few for outfits around. And my name got around slow, the way my kind of name does, not the loud way, but men started saying, you want a horse gentled and not broke. You want the quiet fellow up on the rule bench. He'll take the worst horse you've got and give you back something you can trust your boy to. The black lived to be near 30. He's buried up there. I'll be up there too before long. She talked plenty over the years around the cabin. Turned out she had a great deal to say once she had somebody worth saying it to, and I loved the sound of it, her going on while she worked. And I'd sit and mend tack and listen and not need to answer, and she didn't need me to. She knew my answers before I'd have given them anyhow. She'd ask me a thing and then go on and answer it herself the way I'd have answered and laugh, and she was right every time, near enough. 41 years we had. I won't pretend they were easy years. They were hard years in a hard country, and we buried more than we'd have liked, and there was want in them and worry. But there was never a day, not one, that I didn't know I was seen. You don't know what that's worth until you've gone a long while without it. To be looked at by one person who knows the whole of what you are, the part that doesn't talk and the part under that, and to see in their face that they're glad of it. A man can stand a great deal of weather knowing that. I still warm the bit in my hands of a cold morning. There's a colt down in the corral now, my grandson's, a leggy bay with a soft eye, no meanness in him, raised gentle so he never had to be unruined. I stand at the rail in the dark with my coffee, and the boy thinks I'm teaching the horse and I let him think it. I'm not doing much of anything. I'm standing in the cold being a thing that doesn't want, the way I learned to, the way she watched me do it through a cookhouse window the first winter, and I'm waiting on the morning star to go pale. She's been gone 2 years now. The cookhouse window on the old place is boarded over. Nobody's run that outfit in a long time. But I'll tell you what I see every cold morning when I lean on that rail and put my breath out into the dark, and a young horse comes over on his own to stand with me and breathe back. I see a doorway and a lantern, and snow coming into a woman's dark hair, and 2 hands pressed flat against my chest over a warm stone. I see her come across a crowded room to take my face in her hands. There you are, Eli. I never did learn to say it back, not in all those years, not in words. But she knew. She always knew. She'd known a good while. That was the whole conversation, near enough. It lasted 41 years, and most of it never made a sound.